The line screamed into Operator 7's console. They were asking again, what is her name? He slammed a mute, thumbed a patch, and let Marta Ray's breath run across the broadcast. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He had learned to feel suspicion as a practical tool, not a mood. The console lights jittered. Outside the glass of the control room, the night held the county's low hum. Inside, the feeds were fracturing. Operator 7 moved without theater. He tapped the analog stopwatch at his wrist, sent a concise routing to auxiliary channels, and spoke into the headset in the steady cadence his badge demanded. Patch the line through. Record and isolate. Ramos, I want relay telemetry on your feed now. The words were procedural, clipped. His hands registered the concrete. The worn headset strap rubbing his temple, the rectangle of his service badge catching the desk light, the console's slider that always stuck at channel 5. He was the anchor. He had trained for interference, for civilian panic, for equipment failure. He had not trained for voices that turned questions into currents. The central problem sat in front of him. A live civilian call had spread an anomalous prompt through household radios and smart speakers, and any attempt to clarify the prompt seemed to amplify the signal. He himself to treat it like a technical failure. That reasoning guided his first moves. Operator 7, this is Ramos at Relay 3. I've got spiking harmonics on band C, Ramos reported. His voice carrying grit and the distance of a substation lot. A second voice interrupted, Sheriff Cole on a scanner channel, terse and close. Operator, I have units en route to Marta Ray's address. She's repeating the line herself on a handheld radio. The control room folded into activity. Operator 7 keyed a log entry and assigned an overlay to the recording bank. Within 7 minutes, the broadcast became a patchwork of conflicting tones. A municipal alert sound bled into a thrift store radio feed. A blinking red indicator on a borrowed CRUT monitor flashed an abstract emblem for precisely 1 second and vanished. Marta's voice returned, quieter. I asked and it asked back. Operator 7 felt his suspicion shift into a pressing need to stop listeners from asking the same question. He announced a containment protocol into the microphone, precise and stripped of empathy. He knew what he must try first, verification. Do not assume contagion until you can isolate source and chain. Ramos was on his feet and out the door within 2 minutes. Sheriff Cole's cruiser tore away from the station with lights off. The sheriff did not want to draw attention. Operator 7 sent a soft directive to civilian frequencies advising people to avoid repeating unknown prompts. The phrasing felt awkward in his mouth, because the directive itself might trigger the very alignment they feared. They reached the house in under 8 minutes. Marta's porch light burned like a small, stubborn lantern. Sheriff Cole crouched by the front door, radio hissed against his shoulder. Marta held a battered handheld transceiver with both hands. She had a dog curled at her feet whose nails rasped on the porch wood. Cole, Marta, I'm Sheriff Cole. Put the radio down. Step back. Marta's eyes darted between the men and the device. Her lips moved without sound before she spoke. It my name. I asked its name. Then everything in the house started to say it, quiet first, then louder. Her hands trembled so that she gripped the radio strap until the canvas bit her palms. Sheriff Cole glanced at Ramos, who had already raised a battery-powered field analyzer. Ramos muttered, we were seeing micro-harmonics. Pattern repeats with time, lag echoes. It locks when interaction increases. His fingers worked the knobs on a handheld unit, precise motions that contrasted with Marta's trembling. Back at the control room, Operator 7 watched telemetry climb. When Marta attempted to clarify, her neighbor's smart speakers chimed a tone and mirrored the same question in layered echoes through the night. A door opened 2 houses down and a voice called, "Who's there?" The devices answered themselves. A synthesized whisper that repeated the phrase Marta had just spoken. Operator 7's suspicion hardened into a rule. Any spoken inquiry created a feedback pattern that synchronized otherwise disparate signals. He ordered a temporary power cut to the immediate grid serving Marta's block circuit 9. Cut local feed. Isolate the house from the grid. The technician on call complied, and the night went unevenly dark across a wedge of neighborhood. The cut did not mute the phenomenon. Radios in vehicles, battery-powered devices, and the CRUT monitor in the station continued to cough the same phrasing in unison. Each time someone tried to ask for a clarification, the repetition grew fuller and achieved a harmonic stability that infected other devices. We tried to cut power. Ramos over the line, signal persistence doesn't look like stray earth. It correlates with vocalized confirmation. The waveform sharpens when someone speaks aloud toward the source. He sounded unsettled in a way that narrowed Operator 7's attention. The anchor voice had to become command-level precise. He spoke into the main mic with controlled brevity. Do not ask the line any questions. Issue instruction set alpha, no verbal clarifications. Record any repeated phrasing, but do not read it aloud. His words were careful, chosen to avoid the compulsion they were combating. The sheriff tried to follow the instruction. His throat worked, and then he said, "Marta, what did it?" He never completed the question. The radio in his cruiser clicked to life and layered 3 pitches of the same query behind his voice. Sheriff Cole's jaw tightened. He caught himself answering a probe he had not intended to commit. "Stop it," he said, and the devices synchronized into a chant of the question itself. The phenomenon had a mechanism. Oral inquiry provided the waveform its phase reference. Operator 7 watched as responders moved from tactical distance into ineffective containment. He ordered lockdown of public rebroadcast systems. He assigned a recorder to transcribe the question into text only, never to be vocalized on air. Ramos copied Marta's handheld audio into an offline buffer and fed the station's Duvera looped silence to mask the original frequency. They used written notes, hand signals, and signaled commands instead of speech near the house. Still, the county's devices pulsed in partial sync. At the relay substation, Ramos climbed the service ladder with a crowbar and a patched radio strapped inside his coat. He wore grease on his knuckles and radio static in his hair. He Operator 7 over the open line that a red emblem had flashed on a service monitor for one breath length while he was rerouting a feed. It looked like an eye, Operator Ramos, then it was gone. The hardware smoked for a second like a candle blown out. His voice was low. He did not panic, he reported. When he touched the metal casing to force a manual override, his fingers registered a heat that had no explanatory sensor on the panel. Marta's dog began to whine in the dark inside the house. "Sheriff Cole, bring the dog out, Marta." Now the animal's nails scraped the floor as she opened the door. The dog moved with its nose low, ears flat, following the scent path at the threshold. "It would not look up, Marta. It knows something I can't see." She did not voice a question. She had learned to avoid the channeling effect. Operator 7's instruction echoed in his own head. Contain the spread. Keep people from speaking the contagion. The monitoring bank showed an unexpected waveform when Sheriff Cole tried to restrain Marta from leaving. The waveform tightened into a harmonic lock. Every time a human voice tried to interrupt or clarify, the lock strengthened. Operator 7 said, "Do not confront. Dissuade calmly. Move away and maintain distance." He felt his voice fracture with the exhalation of the command. Farther down the county grid, a low-frequency hum rose where no equipment should have been generating it. A neighbor banged on his door and shouted, "What's happening?" The sentence passed through an Oldham radio and returned as a chorus of layered questions. The neighbor's mouth tightened. He began to repeat the question involuntarily, and his voice fractured into echoes. Sheriff Cole took off his hat and covered his mouth with both hands, and the animal at Marta's feet whimpered. Back at the station, Operator 7 instructed a sanitized loop to play on open municipal frequencies. An unvoiced list of safety steps delivered as recorded beeps and text crawls, no human voice, only the mechanical cadence of alerts. He watched the transcription buffer fill with the forbidden question in print. He checked the badge on his chest, the metal catch that never left him, and told Ramos to prepare for sacrificial dampening if the waveform continued to build. Ramos understood. They both understood what sacrificial meant, hardware loss to achieve signal collapse. The sheriff tried to physically restrain Marta to prevent further vocal contagion. "Marta, sit down. Stay with me." Marta's hands jerked. She had a memory flare, concrete, tactile. The night before, her mother had slammed a door and the radio had been playing a commercial about a missing child. The sound had stayed in her teeth. She tightened her jaw and looked at Sheriff Cole. "Don't make me talk," she said. "I don't want to make it louder." Her mouth was a cracked hinge. Sheriff Cole answered, "Marta, we were trying to help. Marta, look at me." His voice shortened to commands. They traded several rapid lines in a tensioned argument. 3 to 5 back and forths where orders and pleas collided. Operator 7 watched on monitors as the neighborhood devices synchronized. The phantom of a red emblem appeared briefly on a volunteer's portable monitor and then jumped to another screen across Ramos' telemetry. That moment marked the escalation. When the emblem aligned across two independent displays, the signal achieved cross-channel phase lock. Operator 7's comm cadence accelerated slightly. He issued a hard order for Ramos to execute manual shutdown at Relay Site 7. Ramos confirmed, then added, "It will take an arc. I'll burn the coil if I have to." The technician's decision changed the plan from isolation to sacrifice. The containment attempt failed to prevent contagion from spiking further. As responders whispered through clenched teeth, the county's devices began to play the same question with layered timing offsets, creating an audible comm filter that made each syllable vibrate. People in houses 2 blocks away found their kitchen radios repeating Marta's phrasing. A driver pulled over and shut off his engine to stop the car's speaker from adding another voice into the chorus. He brought his hands to his mouth to stop himself from speaking and stared at the dotted line of his console clock, then the concrete twist. When Operator 7 ordered silence, one of the officers at Marta's house used a handheld radio to ask whether to transport her. The question warped the pattern. A second later, the officer's voice synced and repeated the forbidden phrasing back at them. But it was not his voice alone. An underlayer of 3 other voices repeated with a slight delay. Sheriff Cole's eyes widened. "Operator 7, they were not answering us. They are answering themselves." The sentence landed like a hard strike. "Ramos, we thought it required vocal reference. It now uses vocal reference to colonize other transmitters. Asking activates its phasing." The risk had grown from local loop to contagious protocol. Ramos went to the relay substation and prepared sacrificial dampening. He described what he would do: open the safety vents, manually disconnect the feed, and create a hard arc across the main coil to break the harmonic lock. The action would fry the relay hardware. Operator 7 gave the authorization. He watched Ramos' hands on the terminal via telemetry feed as the technician removed bolts, the metal clinking in the dark. The risk was hardware loss and a partial communication blackout. The alternative was wider contamination. At the house, Marta slipped from Sheriff Cole's brief hold and moved toward the doorway. Her eyes were fixed on the dog, crouched at the threshold. She bent and whispered a single concrete sentence to the animal: "Go with Sheriff Cole." The phrase had intent but was not a question. The dog looked up and trotted out without looking back. Sheriff Cole took the animal and did not speak. He tightened the leash with a deliberate, visible motion and led the dog away from the porch. That movement, action without interrogation, felt like a small victory. Ramos executed the manual override. A bright arc spat across the relay's housing. Sparks flew and a hot pop echoed through the substation like a gunshot. The county's telemetry bucked and then slumped. The harmonic lock fractured. Within 30 seconds, the wavering chorus thinned. The layered echoes dropped out in a staggered cascade. The CRUT monitors in the control room flashed white, and then went dead one by one. Operator 7 sat very still while the station filled with a mechanical groan. The sacrificial dampening had bought them a partial collapse. When silence returned, it carried residue. An emblem blinked, faint and red, on one isolated screen. Operator 7 felt the residue under his tongue, attacked a cold in the bones of the day. He did not vocalize fear. He reported status and continued protocol. Ramos relayed damage: coil fused, indicator lights dead, several auxiliary relays fried. Sheriff Cole confirmed Marta was physically stable but mentally shaking. Marta sat in the sheriff's cruiser with the dog on her lap. She repeated one detail that mattered. When the devices synchronized, they displayed a single brief image on some screens, an abstract eye in a red field. The image had not persisted long enough for photographs, but enough witnesses saw it to confirm it had existed. Operator 7 recorded the detail and marked it as evidence. The concrete reveal altered their understanding. The phenomenon had a visual emblem that accompanied the auditory lock. They closed the incident with a temporary, sterile directive: do not repeat any unknown prompts, log and report all anomalous transmissions as text only, avoid vocal confirmation near suspected sources. Operator 7 issued the directive in a flat voice that concealed the trembling he refused to show. He scheduled a temporary blackout of public rebroadcasts and ordered field teams to monitor without speaking. The command chain accepted the plan, and the county went into a fragile, watchful pause. The final minutes of the night left a residue of procedural learning. Marta, shaking, handed Sheriff Cole a written note containing the exact phrasing she had heard. Cole read it aloud only in fragments to confirm, then tore the rest into strips and locked them in an evidence bag. Ramos logged the relay's failure and listed the sacrificial hardware for replacement. Operator 7 wrote precise instructions in the emergency binder so future responders would not speak the question aloud. The chapter's mini-conflict had been resolved. The local contagion collapsed when technicians sacrificed relay hardware, yet the solution felt partial. Operator 7 watched the remaining monitors until dawn softened the world outside the station's windows. The faint red emblem blinked once more on an isolated screen and then vanished. He did not interpret it. He catalogued it. He ordered quiet patrols and a handwritten memo distributed to local agencies reminding them, "Do not seek clarification of unknown prompts." He folded the day's events into logs and sealed a section of the recording as restricted. Before he left his console, Operator 7 opened a drawer and removed a small crot monitor pendant that hung on a thin chain. He ran a fingertip along its dusty glass, then clipped it back under his uniform where the pendant could catch no inadvertent signal. He clipped his badge to his chest, felt the cool metal and stood. At the station's threshold, Sheriff Cole's cruiser idled with a woman and a dog inside. The sheriff looked at Operator 7 and said, "We're going to watch them tonight. We'll call if anything else happens." The line of duty in his voice was plain and exact. Operator 7 nodded once. He walked to the glass and stared at the dark outer world where the county lights blinked obediently. He felt suspicion shift again, this time into a disciplined vigilance. He turned back to the monitors, shut down non-essential display power, and left a single isolated recorder on a low-gain loop. He logged the incident closure and typed one procedural phrase into the record. The containment succeeded with hardware sacrifice. Do not vocalize unknown prompts. He hit enter. As he stepped from the control room, the isolated recorder sent out a single, unintended blip on a background test frequency. The blip was not a voice and contained no question, but in a house 2 streets over a smart speaker hiccuped and repeated, in a dry mechanical voice, a syllable that none of them had intended to send. Operator 7 heard it in the hallway as he clipped his coat. He did not shout. He did not ask. He paused, took the pendant off his chest, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. The radio in the control room stilled. Outside, the county held its breath on a hinge. The transmission collapsed into a looping static emblem, and the line dropped to dead air. Lines flooded the console. Operator 7 shoved his palm down on the nearest mute, and the room answered like a struck bell. Suspicion tightened his jaw as 3 headsets lit and blinked with identical audio fingerprints, each voice asking the same phrase in slightly different pitches. He did not sit and think. He slapped a patch to isolate the lines and barked orders through a throat already hoarse from on-air hours. Operator 7 moved through the control room the way an engineer moves through failing machinery. Fast hands, crisp commands, eyes on meters. He had worked this floor for 11 years. He knew the layout of failure by touch. The console had screamed this before, when a caller had forced Marta Rai's line across his feed and the room had heard that single forbidden question. He replayed that memory as a concrete clip. The console read, lit Marta's breath on an open channel, a caller's word cutting through the hum, and used that exact sound to make decisions now. The problem was clear. Attempts to confirm the transmission made it louder. That fact drove every instruction out of his mouth. Jensen, Operator 7 said, voice flat, tracer now, patch Marta, field check, no open mics unless ordered, repeat. No open mics, on it, Tech. Jensen answered. He was already typing. The keys clacked like a diagnostic heartbeat. Operator 7's suspicion moved into a new gear. His hands stopped their small taps and he watched the levels. He could not afford to let his voice become a vector. He reached for the isolation toggle and kept his fingers there until Marta's line came through. Breath held so tight he could feel it in his teeth. The next minutes were a choreography of containment attempts and the slow, stubborn escalation that came from the team's own procedures. Jensen fed an inbound trace into the diagnostics bay while Marta patched a mobile feed and drove to the field. Operator 7 ordered the recording loop closed. He attempted to trap the feed inside a quarantine playback. Each choice had a cost. Every outbound signal, every question directed at citizens, offered the transmission something to graft onto. Marta arrived at the suburban address with her helmet mic clipped and a small camera mounted to her lapel. She pushed open the front door and found the living room frozen mid-motion. A coffee cup tipped on the rug, a television on mute with several devices showing the same frozen frame, and Mrs. Klein sitting in the middle of the couch with her hands cupped at her mouth. Marta took one step in, and her recorder picked up a voice through the house system, whispering the forbidden phrase in cadence with the other callers. Mrs. Klein, Marta, low and procedural, this is Marta Ray's government field unit. Are you? Mrs. Klein's eyes did not blink at first. When they did, the movement was slow and automatic, like a muscle returning from cramp. What is her name? She said, quiet and flat. Her lips moved as if reading from a script. Marta's fingers found the record button. Her hand was steady at first. Then it trembled when a nearby tablet chimed and the same question looped cleanly from speakers behind the couch. Marta reached out and shut the tablet down. The household devices clicked off and on together. Their LED indicators blinked in unison. She stepped back toward her car and spoke into her mic, voice clipped Marta to Jensen. Household devices are synchronized. They repeat the phrase without prompt. No visible source. Mrs. Klein is conscious but repeating audio loop recorded, sending file, copy, Jensen. He was listening to Marta's file and watching his tracer snake along the network map, trace incoming. Feed looks clean, hold. It folds back onto a local loop. Operator 7, you have to see this. Operator 7's suspicion hardened into a tense calculation. He ran the diagnostics again. The tracer showed the feed routing into the facility's archived backup loop, and then spiking outward as the station attempted to rebroadcast the emergency patch. The transmission was not only external, it had writ itself into the station's infrastructure. Every call, every vocal verification, created new vectors for replication. We tried containment before. Operator 7 said, voice low. We thought quarantine would hold. It didn't. Jensen, how fast can you sever the rebroadcast? I can trigger an override in 20 seconds, but the loop's echoing into multiple nodes inside our backups. The moment we cut, some devices show a fight. Either they drop or they lock onto the last packet before Jensen could finish. An archive terminal flashed with a retrieval request from an older session. Operator 7 frowned and tapped it open. The video clip on the screen showed a different control room angle from a year earlier. The same console bank, the same fluorescent glare. He watched his own face, younger, hair a little longer, mouth moving as he asked the forbidden question in a clipped tone. The room played the audio and Operator 7 heard his own voice as if from a tape left running in a different year. That's not possible, Jensen. It is now, Operator 7 said. He felt doubt edge into him. Doubt arrived as cold tightness in his thumbs. He had to move. He ordered the override. Cut the rebroadcast now, Jensen. Close the loop and seal the archive. The override slammed into the system like an iron door. External feeds dropped away. Lines fell silent for half a beat and then came back with synchronized breathing sounds from callers and staff. The feed had changed tactic. Instead of continuing as a simple interruption, it synchronized human mouths and devices into the same question and response pattern. Marta's live feed from Mrs. Klein's house showed Mrs. Klein's face sag slightly as she mouthed a phrase she did not understand. Marta's mic captured it. Her own voice answering involuntary and thin. Marta, Marta, say your name. Operator 7 ordered, throat tight. Marta's line came back ragged. Marta Rays, she said. Then a pause where she did not intend one. Then a soft repetition, Marta Rise. The words were automatic, as if the station's signal had rearranged syllables inside her. Operator 7 slammed his palm on the console and tried to force his voice into a pattern of command that would not attach. He grabbed a blank emergency template and began recording a directive to override. He spoke in measured phrases, syllable by syllable, trying to craft words that would not be intelligible hooks for the transmission. Do not seek clarification. He said into the recorder, do not repeat questions. Do not call in. He hit save and sealed the file behind an encrypted tag. When he played back the saved directive to confirm the encryption, the file had been overwritten by his own voice asking the forbidden question in his exact cadence. He heard himself ask it with no memory of having said it. Heat rose into his neck and his throat worked to swallow air. How did Jensen began? It Graft's voices, Operator 7 said. He looked at the screen and watched waveform patterns adopt the contours of his speech. It takes what we use to correct it and makes that the instrument of spread. Jensen called up the archive again and scrolled through clips. He found 3 more instances where staff voices appeared inside old emergency files, each clip time-stamped in different years. Operator 7 watched his own cadence appear in files marked for different shifts. Each time the graph looked precise. The forbidden question folded effortlessly into staff recordings. Operator 7 realized, cold and calculating, that institutional authority was no protection. It was the mechanism we cut external rebroadcasts, and it came through us. Marta quietly over the line. We fed it. Yes, Operator 7 said. He felt the emotion shift from suspicion to urgent fear. Fear arrived in the way his hands trembled over the console instead of steadying. He forced the trimmer into action, sealed devices in-house checks. Tell Mrs. Klein to cover her ears, shut down displays. Jensen, take the diagnostics offline when I say. Follow Protocol 3. They moved to Protocol 3. Marta's field feed showed her voice in the living room repeating short, precise commands. Mrs. Klein, cover ears. Tablet off. Television off. The commands were action first. Marta gave them in stern bursts and held the line open, counting silences into the mic. The household complied physically. Hands over ears, devices darkening, lights flicking. The physical acts broke the immediate synchronization in that room. Back in the control room, Jensen watched the tracer and saw a spike in the backup loop that crawled outward like roots. The station's own archived streams were now a web feeding multiple local nodes. Operator 7 ordered manual shutdowns of the tape servers. Jensen reached for a breaker and hesitated for a fraction of a second. His jaw worked. Jensen, do it now, Operator 7 said. Jensen snapped the breaker. The archive banks went quiet. For 4 breaths the entire building seemed to hold. Then low-level static rolled through consoles like a mechanical sigh. The staff exchanged one short, businesslike line of confirmation each. Archive breaker off, loop severed. Recording sealed. The relief was thin. The tracer still showed residual packets rotating through consumer devices. The transmission had already seeded outward. Operator 7 felt another emotional shift. The tight control that governed his posture loosened into a blunt, action-driven resignation. He was no longer trying to outthink the signal. He was trying to limit damage. Then the room's lead banks blinked and a small red emblem appeared across the main CRUT. It was a simple geometric eye rendered in deep red against a black square. The emblem slid into the corner of every live feed and every household device that had been active in the last hour. The emblem did not make sound. It did not need to. The sight of it on the station monitors made Jensen step back. The emblem is on screen. Jensen, mainframe, field devices, household streams. It's synchronized. Operator 7 pushed his chair away and stood. He felt anger, then reprimand, an institutional reflex to name and control the anomaly. He went to the isolation booth to record a new emergency directive, hands clenching the microphone stand. He set the levels, exhaled, and spoke in the clipped cadence staff relied on for clarity. This is an emergency directive. Remain in place. Do not seek clarification. Await official instructions. He hit save, then played the saved file to ensure it was intact. The directive played back fine at first, precise and neutral. Then the last line warped and folded into a transmission of his own voice, asking the forbidden question, delivered in the same measured cadence he had used moments earlier. The edit had been made without hands. Marta's voice came through the booth monitor, cold and small. Operator 7, the recorder shows corruption. Your voice, it's in the file. He had no defense left but procedure and blunt orders. He set the broadcast to loop the unaffected portion and placed a hard mute on the final second. He physically covered his mouth and spoke only into the closed loop mic. Marta, if you hear someone ask the question on a device, do not answer. If a device prompts you for her name, turn the device off immediately. Jensen, flag every household with the emblem. Isolate them for manual checks. Their responses were efficient, thin with adrenaline. Marta confirmed checklists. Jensen compiled lists. The 3 of them moved with practiced steps. Then the impossible happened. Marta's open feed from Mrs. Klein went silent for 2 seconds, and when it returned, the camera captured a man in the doorway of the house. No one who matched the Klein's history, tall, faceless in silhouette, standing motionless. The man did not speak. Miss Klein pointed at him without moving her lips, and one of the devices in the room chimed the forbidden question in a childlike sing-song, "Marta." "Back out of that house now," Operator 7 ordered. "Do not engage." "Retreat to your vehicle." Marta moved toward the door with a speed that showed fear in her shoulders. Her breath hit the mic in short pulls. "I'm out," she said. "I'm in the car. The figure's at the threshold. I can't see a face." The control room responded with a new surge of activity. Operators repeated protocols, doors were checked, and the station's physical security was alerted. Operator 7 watched Marta through the parked camera angle as she locked the car doors and sat breathing, fingers pressed to the wheel. Her hands shook enough that the camera image had a small tremor. "We have to log this as an incident, Jensen. If the emblem is appearing, then affected devices will show the marker. They will be isolated, but many might not report." Operator 7 felt the last of his composure break into terse focus. He realized the signal had evolved. It no longer only interrupted transmissions, it now placed a visible marker on affected targets. That marker would change how victims were found and how help responded. There was little time. In the archive, Jensen dug deeper and found a pattern. Instances where staff voices had been grafted into old files corresponded to times when personnel had attempted to clarify a strange interruption publicly. Each attempt to define the anomaly left a set of breadcrumbs for the transmission to reuse. The twist hit Operator 7 like a physical shove. The institution's standard of verification, their insistence on confirming and repeating, was exactly what the signal used to spread. He called out a short list of orders and let the words land hard. No public statements, no call-ins, field teams stand down from routine checks. Only pre-authorized silent assessments. Archive access is locked. Every outgoing line is dead unless encrypted. For a moment, there was the illusion of control. But then the console speakers in the control room played a recorded clip they had not cued. His own voice asking the forbidden question, followed by a crowd of civilian voices that matched the earlier field file. The playback was sourced from a sealed archive folder that had been offline. Operator 7 watched the waveform and felt something that was not just fear. It was an exhaustion mixed with a clarity of purpose. He had to protect the people listening now, even if he could not stop the transmission entirely. He made a decision he had not wanted to make. He opened a secure channel and recorded a directive in as neutral a tone as he could manage, pausing deliberately between phrases so that each pause could not be used as a hook. "Do not answer. If you hear a repeated question, cover your ears and disconnect power to the device. Wait for a certified broadcast. Do not seek clarification." He sent the file to a limited distribution and held his breath. The message propagated to a limited grid and then returned changed. The last line had been overwritten. In his own timbre, the question repeated. Operator 7 stared at the monitor until the Krutz phosphor burn looked like a bruise across his vision. He could not tell whether the overwrite had happened in transit or at the moment of playback, but the result was identical. The station's effort to correct the hazard had become a new instrument of it. He looked at Jensen and said, voice lower, words forced out like commands for himself as much as the room. "We contain what we can. We do not speak to the public. We keep people from answering. We log and isolate. We give them actions. Cover, power off, wait." Marta's line came through, small and strained. "Operator 7, there are devices in a cluster downtown that are showing blank screens and the emblem. People are standing in the street. They look like they're waiting." Operator 7 ordered units to cordon. He felt the emotional rhythm change again. The suspicion that had started the night turned to focused urgency, then to a heavy resignation that was still methodical. He moved to the main console and keyed a short procedural loop to be transmitted over secured emergency channels only to field units. "Do not clarify." He double-checked encryption. He pressed send. The emergency channel accepted the packet and routed it to field units. For 30 seconds, nothing altered. Then a single unit in the field reported back with a terse message. Our recorder played the phrase back. "We did not speak it, but a private channel shows overwrite in our logs." The unit officer's voice sounded small over the intercom. Operator 7 felt something shift in his chest, a fatigue he could not hide. He had started the night with suspicion. He had moved through doubt and then fear, and now he wore a precise resignation like work gloves. He had to finish this sequence. He recorded one final instructional clip and saved it to a locked device. He instructed Marta and Jensen to copy the file to multiple offline drives and to physically remove any line capable of rebroadcast. They followed his orders with rapid, businesslike replies. Operator 7 watched Marta's hands work the drives, saw the way she paused for a fraction when a handheld chimed with the forbidden question even as she covered it. The final external event came like a cut on a film. The emblem spread across screens citywide. Devices that were offline blinked once and showed the red eye on black. In some cases, people found the emblem on their sleeping child's tablet and could not make the child look away. In others, the emblem appeared on municipal signage. Operator 7 closed his eyes for the first time since the night had begun. He felt a precise, clinical sadness rather than a vague sorrow. He remembered the earlier incident where Marta's breath had crossed his console, and how that moment had taught him the cost of verification. He understood fully now that their systems, their pledge to confirm and clarify, had been neutralized and turned into the hazard. He opened his eyes and spoke, "Seal the facility. Notify the chain. Do not issue public clarifications. Await further instructions." He left the final words hanging in the air and stepped away from the console. Jensen and Marta moved to implement final physical safeguards. The CRUT bank dimmed. The monitors that remained active showed only the red emblem on infinite black fields. The broadcast line went dead. The last thing the room heard before the silence was a short mechanical click as the emergency recorder spun down. Operator 7 walked to the observation window and watched the lot lights blink in routine. The station had survived the immediate escalation, but the transmission had changed the rules. It had grafted their voices into its pattern and learned to use their efforts to propagate. He felt exhaustion and acceptance layered together and made decisions accordingly. He turned back to the console and spoke into the sealed mic, voice low and steady. Careful of cadence, await instructions. Do not answer calls. Do not seek clarification. He hit the final seal and watched the red emblem on screen until the phosphor faded to a dull smear. Then the feed went black and an automated loop began, the emblem rotating slowly on a black CRUT field. A fragment of the directive repeated faintly beneath the static, and the control room settled into a delayed, careful quiet. The chapter closed with action taken, containment partial, and a new order issued, concrete measures, not speeches. The threat remained, but the team had learned how the hazard used them. That knowledge would be a tool for tomorrow,